Hi, I'm Suzanne Ciani, and I'm going to talk to you today about the use of randomness in my performance practice with the Buchla analog music modular instrument. So, my experience with artificial intelligence began in 1969 when I took a summer course at the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Stanford to study computer music with Max Matthews, the father of computer music. It was an amazing experience. We had to get to the lab at about 5 in the morning. I noticed then that there was also a use of these machines with autistic children because they seemed to be able to have a relationship with a machine more easily than with a human. About that same year, I met Don Buchla. I was a graduate student at the University of California at Berkeley, getting my master's degree in traditional music composition, having had a very classical background. However, when I discovered just the possibility of the concept of electronic music, I was completely smitten. And I knew instinctively that this was going to be my expression. So when I finished graduate school, I went to work for Don Buchla in his factory, and I was soldering boards and really became under his spell. And he had evolved his concept of electronic music instrument design to envision a performance instrument. And that's what I embraced. So from the very beginning, my relationship with the machine was one of interacting with it live in the moment. Now, of course, I anthropomorphized the machine a bit because the way Don designed it, it had a lot of feedback. It told you what it was thinking. So, where the voltage was, where the stage of the sequence was, where the spatial location was, all of this data was transmitted by LEDs. To this day, this is an aspect lacking in the instrument design of analog modulars. So, uh, I devoted about the next 10 years to my relationship with this machine. And at one point, I was invited to perform in New York City in an art gallery. And I went with my Buchla to New York, just my Buchla, and I ended up staying there for 19 years. My goal was to perform, to be a performer, to make my living performing the Buchla. And of course, it was a little bit too soon for that. But I did meet a man, an agent, who said, well, if we're going to work together, I want you to take a course that will help us to communicate. So this was the early EST training. I didn't know what it was. I just followed, cooperatively to the request of this agent. And I discovered that my secret in that training was that I was in love with a machine. And this was I felt maybe there was something wrong with me that I had such a deep relationship with a machine. And then, of course, in the end, the denouement of this whole training was that people, in fact, are machines, and that we just need to understand each other's operating systems, and that therefore we can communicate and wonderful things will happen. So that endorsed what I thought might be a problem. And I went on happily with my relationship with the machine. So I developed a very close rapport, spending a lot of time interacting with the Buchla 200. Today, I've gone back to performing with the Buchla, but I'm using the Buchla 200E, which is what you see here, which is a slightly different version. Technology changes all the time, and the way the parts are done are differently. But the concept and the overall design of the machine is very much like the 200. So, when I perform, I become aware of techniques that are needed to enhance the capabilities of the machine. So these machines as all machines, are good at repetition. So you can make a pattern and it will go ad infinitum, and that quickly gets boring. So what I've discovered is that if I add an additional layer of randomness, I can explode the possibilities of the underlying raw material. Randomness is not chaos. It's not out of control. It's not, oh gosh, I don't know what's going to happen. With the Buchla, you can be very specific about randomness, when a random voltage will be generated, how much excursion it will take, what is the range of it, what is the probability that it will be in that range. There are so many parameters that allow you to refine the random content that gives us a musical ingredient. I call it spice, that you add just a little bit, and it brings to life a lot of the layers of the music. I'm going to show you some of those random uh, techniques in a minute. I also want to say that I was a speaker at the very first TED conference in 1984, and I had the privilege of being there with Mandelbrot, who was talking about fractals. And again, I was just, struck with the simplicity. I think we all look for simplicity in our solutions because there's something magical about finding that crystalline description of complexity. So Mandelbrot, was not so much about randomness, although there's definitely an element of complexity that arises from his embedding these equations into each other. I feel that my use of randomness is an elegant solution. Humans are random. That's what we love about each other. The machine can be very predictable, and that's what we love about machines, that they are predictable. But in order to enhance that relationship, I love letting the machine express its randomness the same way I do. And that to me humanizes the machine and actually results in more humanistic music. So I'm going to show you now a couple of patterns that I use. Okay, so we're going to go over to this machine and let's see what we can do. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is show you one of my uses of randomness. So here we have a sequence that's going to be on. And as you can see, it's just a 2-note sequence. I think you can hear that. And it's a machine, so it can go on and on like this forever. And now what I'd like to do is add some randomness to the wave shape. So I have a light moving here in a random pattern. It's being triggered by a pulse that comes from the sequencer so that it is in time with the sequencer. I use this random voltage for a number of things. I use it for spatial placement over here. You can see that these two outputs are random. These are the ones we're listening to. And now I'm going to tune up these levers, and every time that randomly encounters this position, so here's what I've done. I've created something of much more musical interest than just the 2-note pattern. It's still just a 2-note pattern, but what we're listening to is the timbral change that is happening randomly. So now I'm going to show a second example of how randomness enhances a pattern that repeats itself. So here is a pattern. and you can hear it just looping. It's a 16-stage sequence. And now what I'm going to do, you see this random motion, I'm going to assign different octave transpositions to various stages here, and when that stage is accessed, it will shift the octave. So now we're still hearing just one line, but that one line is now broken up into an octave pattern. I can make the envelope a little shorter. And I can add a second sequence. So your ear starts to perceive a new melody that is generated by the randomness of the bugla. It's a very musical use of randomness. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that the use of randomness in a very judicial way is a huge enhancement to the live performance of modular electronic music instruments. It is a primary technique. It can be used for spatial location, to create excitement. It can be used for timbral. Actually, anything that is voltage controllable, which is basically all the parameters of sound, can be manipulated with a degree of randomness. This is, I think, an important technique for giving an expansion of what the machine can give back to us. It's much better at randomness than we are. It's much better at controlled randomness, and it is something that the machine can contribute to the performance. Thank you very much. Bye.